I'm Clara Wynne. The last time my mother called me by my name, I was 17 and barefoot, bleeding from the lip. I was standing in our kitchen under that flickering ceiling light. She never replaced, hands clenched around a broken plate I hadn't meant to drop. She said it slowly, like peeling back the label of a jar she no longer wanted. "You're not ours anymore, Clara." I didn't say anything back, not out loud. Just stared at the grout between the floor tiles where lemon-scented cleaner pooled in the cracks. That house smelled like bleach and unsaid things. We weren't a family. We were a performance. And I was always off script. They said I would ruin everything. That's the exact phrase they used. "You'll ruin the Wynne name." Like it was a crystal goblet I'd knocked off the table. My father said it first, but my mother followed, and once they spoke it into the world, it hung in the air like smoke. You can't wave away. I was supposed to apologize, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the silence that followed. It wasn't empty, it was full. Heavy, sharp around the edges. My whole childhood was like that, a silence so thick it made your ears ring. There was a room in our house I wasn't allowed to enter. It was small, barely a study tucked behind the stairs and locked from the inside. My father kept his medals in there, his discharge papers, the official portraits of him standing in a pressed uniform with eyes like frost. I used to sit outside that room when no one was home and press my ear to the door. Not because I thought I'd hear anything, but because I wanted to prove something invisible was there. I tried the doorknob once when I was 10. It was cold and stiff. I told my mother. She looked up from her garden clippers and said, "That room's not for you." Just like that, like I had reached for something dirty. Sometimes I think that door became a symbol for everything they thought I didn't deserve. Honor, legacy, recognition, all locked up not because I wasn't good enough, but because I asked the wrong questions. My father, Colonel Edward Wynne, wasn't cruel in the loud ways. He didn't scream. He didn't raise his hand often. But when he did, it was like judgment, not punishment. He had a voice that could gut you in under 5 words. And he used it sparingly, like a scalpel. I remember once, I was 12, I asked him why women couldn't serve in combat like men. He looked at me like I'd asked why the sun rises in the west. "Because they weren't built for it," he said. Then he turned back to his newspaper. That was my first lesson in locked doors. My brother Thomas was the one they loved. Quiet, obedient, dressed in blue collars and memorized prayers. He didn't flinch when Dad looked his way. He lowered his eyes like a good win. I don't blame him for surviving that way. But he learned to unsee me fast, especially when I cut my hair short, started wearing Army surplus boots, asked to join ROTC. I became a kind of ghost in my own house, seen but not spoken of. I remember one night I must have been 16. I stood outside the locked room and whispered my name into the door. Just to see what it sounded like in that hallway. Just to remind myself I existed. The door didn't open, of course, but for a moment the air shifted. I swear I felt it, like maybe even the house was wondering what I was doing there. The last year I lived at home, I started hiding things. A compass under my mattress. A torn photo of my grandmother tucked in a hollowed-out dictionary. A small wooden box I carved my initials into, buried behind the shed. Inside it, I placed the medal my grandfather had given me. Before he died, nothing official, just a trinket from his service. It was the first time I had something mine, something not touched by their disapproval. I used to sit on the porch steps after dark and imagine myself walking away from the house. Not running, not slamming the door, just walking like a soldier on leave. Like someone headed somewhere. I didn't tell anyone when I applied to West Point. I used my grandmother's last name, Nolan. It felt like a crack in the glass, a fracture in the story they had written for me. I kept it quiet, even when I got the acceptance letter. They found out the day the recruiter showed up at the house. My mother didn't cry. She just went to the stove and turned off the burner, even though there was nothing cooking. My father looked at me like I had spat on the flag. "You're doing this to hurt us," he said. I wish I'd had something clever to say, but I just stood there, my hands folded behind my back the way I'd practiced. Not smiling, not apologizing, just standing. Later that night, I passed the locked door one last time. I pressed my palm flat against it. Not to open it, just to say goodbye. That was the moment I realized something. They didn't lock that door because I was dangerous. They locked it because they were afraid of what would happen if I walked through it, if I claimed it. I left before sunrise. The porch creaked under my boots. The air smelled like cut grass and dew, and the faint trace of lemon cleaner. I didn't look back, not even once. I used to count the cracks in the dining room ceiling when I was bored or when I needed to disappear without leaving my chair. There were 23. I counted them every Sunday. That table was sacred to my parents. A long, dark slab of cherry wood my father had polished with military precision. You could see your reflection in it if you leaned just right, though we weren't supposed to. My mother said vanity was vulgar, even accidental vanity. Dinner was theater. My father at the head, my mother, to his right, Thomas directly across from me. I learned young how to choreograph silence, how to chew slowly and lower my gaze when the conversation turned sharp. There were rules at that table. Fork in the left hand. No elbows. Don't contradict your father. Don't speak unless spoken to. Especially don't ask questions. The first time I broke the rules, I was 9. I asked what my father had done in the war, really done. Not the newspaper version. The real one. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father didn't raise his voice. He said, "Soldiers don't talk about things children aren't built to hear." Then he stared until I looked away. I didn't eat for the rest of the meal. Not out of punishment, just because my stomach folded in on itself. By the time I was 12, I stopped asking anything that didn't already have a correct answer. But questions kept forming anyway. Quiet, dangerous ones. I was 14 when I wore combat boots for the first time. Found them at a thrift store in town, scuffed and 2 sizes too big. I wore them to the kitchen one Saturday morning, laced all the way up. My father looked at me over his coffee and said, "Take those off before you disgrace the floor." I didn't move. Didn't blink. My mother flinched like I'd broken something sacred. I remember the air. It was thick, sharp with heat from the stove. My father set down his cup, stood up, walked toward me. The slap didn't surprise me. What surprised me was that it didn't hurt that much. It was the first time I realized their anger was smaller than I thought, and that pain, once familiar, becomes something you can learn to ignore. Afterward, Thomas wouldn't look at me. I caught him in the hallway later, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor. I asked, did I ruin it for everyone? He said, "You just don't know when to stop." Then he walked away. He was right. I didn't. It wasn't that I wanted to rebel. It wasn't even that I hated them. It was simpler than that. I wanted to feel real, like I existed in the same world as them. Not just as a warning. The next week, I tried to sit at the head of the table after school, just to see how it felt. My mother saw me and dropped the mail. She didn't yell. She just whispered, "Don't." Her voice cracked on the word. I got up slowly. I never tried again. When I think of my mother now, I don't feel hatred. I feel tightness in my ribs. She was always trying to contain something. Maybe her own voice? Maybe mine. I think she feared chaos more than cruelty. The way she trimmed roses until they bled. The way she folded napkins into sharp triangles as if soft corners would betray her. Thomas was the model child. He went to mass, recited the creed, shook hands with visiting officers, smiled when told. He didn't need to be told twice. I envied that in him once. Now I just see a boy learning to disappear. I remember the last Thanksgiving before I left. I was 16. My father had invited an old colleague from the base, a retired general with a cane and a slow voice. I had just cut my hair short close to my scalp. My mother said nothing. My father refused to make eye contact. The general looked at me and said, "Your son's grown tall." No one corrected him. We finished the meal like nothing had happened. That was the night I started sleeping with my boots on. I began waking before sunrise, stepping out onto the porch to watch the mist lift from the fields behind the house. My breath clouded in the air, and I imagined it was smoke, like something had already burned down. They thought I was slipping away. The truth is, I was building something underneath their gaze, quietly, out of sight. Every lie I told them was a brick. Every silence I endured was mortar. At school, I started asking different questions, not about my family, but about how systems worked, government, leadership, command chains, what made people follow orders and what made them break them. I read about Eleanor Roosevelt and General Patton in the same week. One led with steel under silk, the other with fire and fear. I saw pieces of both in my father, neither in my mother. There were things we never said at our table. We never said, "I'm proud of you." We never said I was wrong. We never said I'm scared. But the silence said it all. And I, sitting in that house full of locked doors and perfectly folded napkins, I carried those unsaid things like survival gear, not knowing yet that they'd be the tools I needed. I just knew I had to leave before I forgot how to use my voice. It was a Tuesday, late spring, but still cold enough that the wind bit through my sweater. My mother handed me the dress in a clear plastic garment bag. Lace-white high-collar buttons like pearls down the back. "You'll wear this to confirmation," she said, smoothing it like it was alive. I remember the way she looked at me, not as a daughter, but like a figure in a painting she was finishing. "This is important, Clara. People will be watching." I took it with both hands and nodded like a good win. But I already knew what I was going to do. I didn't hate the dress. That's not it. I hated what it meant, silence, obedience, a life arranged like a dining table. It was my mother's vision of purity sewn into cotton, a final attempt to make me her reflection. But I wasn't made of glass, not anymore. I waited until after dinner. My father had gone into his study, the one next to the locked room. Thomas was upstairs, pretending he didn't hear anything. I took the dress and slipped out the back door. Behind the shed, I had a clearing, a small circle of trampled grass and dirt where I used to play with toy soldiers before they told me girls shouldn't. That space had been mine once. I reclaimed it that night. I brought matches. It burned faster than I expected. The lace curled into black petals, the buttons popped off like tiny bones. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just watched, eyes steady, until there was nothing but smoke and ash and a faint warmth in my fingers. I buried what was left in a tin box I'd saved from an old Christmas, scratched my name into the lid with a screwdriver. Not the full name, just CW. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening for footsteps, a knock, my mother's voice. Nothing came. The next morning, she didn't mention the dress. Just moved through the kitchen like nothing had shifted. She made eggs, burned the toast, glanced at me once with eyes that didn't blink. That was her way, erase the scene, preserve the play. but something had broken. Later, when my father came in from the porch, he stood by the stove, arms crossed, and said, "You'll never stand for anything if you burn down everything that makes you presentable." It sounded like a warning, or maybe a prayer. I stared at the floor and said nothing. But inside, something answered. I wasn't trying to destroy the image. I was trying to find what was underneath it. At school, rumors spread fast. Someone had seen the smoke. Someone else said I was suspended for disrespecting a teacher, which wasn't true, though, not far off. I'd started speaking in class, challenging things. Dress codes, gender roles, authority. I didn't do it for attention. I did it because my silence had begun to taste like rot. I wore my boots every day now, even when they gave me blisters. I liked the weight of them. They made me feel grounded, real. When I turned 16, I began filling out applications behind my parents' backs. College, military academies, ROTC. I knew I'd never get in using the Wynn name. I wasn't just unwelcome, I was disowned in every way but legally. So, I used my grandmother's last name, Nolan. She was the only person in my family who ever treated me like I wasn't defective. She died when I was 10, but I still remembered her hands scarred from gardening, always warm. She used to say, "The world will make you choose between pleasing others or becoming yourself. Choose carefully." I didn't understand it then. I do now. I forged her signature on one of the letters of recommendation. The rest, I earned. The process was long. Medical clearances, psychological screenings. I remember sitting in the school counselor's office for the interview, sweat crawling down my spine, heart rattling like a cage. The officer asked me why I wanted to serve. I paused. Then I said, "Because I want to earn the right to speak." He stared at me for a beat longer than normal, then nodded. He didn't ask more. My acceptance letter arrived 2 weeks before my 17th birthday. I opened it under my bedsheet with a flashlight, heart pounding. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just sat there, staring at the gold seal, fingers trembling. The words on the page felt heavier than the boots on my feet. Not because they gave me something, but because they confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't broken. I was unfinished. My parents didn't know yet. I kept it that way. Every day became a small performance. I did the dishes. I folded my hands during grace. I even smiled when Thomas made a joke about my haircut. But I felt it, the shift. I was no longer seeking their approval. I was watching them like actors on a stage I was about to exit. The day before I left for the academy, I packed everything I needed into one duffel. Left behind the dresses, the hairbrush with the silver handle, the Sunday shoes. I took only what was mine: boots, compass, dog tag from a thrift store, my grandmother's photo, and the empty tin box that once held a fire. I placed that box in my bag last. I walked through the hallway slowly past the locked room. I touched the doorknob once more. It was still cold, but it didn't matter anymore. I had burned the dress. I had chosen. I arrived before sunrise. The bus dropped me off 2 blocks from the main gate. I remember the sound of my boots hitting the pavement hollow, like echoes inside a ribcage. I had a single duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a clipboard of forms in my hand that I kept folding and unfolding, like they might tell me who I was about to become. It was colder than I expected for late June. A wind came down the Hudson like it knew secrets. I stood there staring through the bars of the gate at West Point, thinking it looked less like a school and more like a fortress. Stone buildings, flags already snapping in the wind, cadets moving in straight lines, uniforms like skin. My name wasn't Clara Wynn anymore. On every form, I was Clara Nolan. It felt right, not like a lie. more like a doorway I could finally walk through. They called it our day reception day, but no one receives you warmly. Your first step onto campus feels like surrendering every softness you've ever had. There's yelling from every direction. They shave your head if you're a boy, strip you of everything that marked you before. You learn to fold, march, speak, stand like everyone else. It's not cruelty, it's design. Break you down, then build you again. I didn't cry that first day. I didn't breathe much either. My chest stayed tight like my ribs were learning new boundaries. My bunk was by a window. That first night, I sat up on the edge of it and watched the stars press through the clouds. I thought of the candle I used to light back home. The one I'd place by the window in winter, the one no one asked about. I thought about lighting one here. Just once. But there was nothing to light it for yet. I didn't know who I was becoming. In the days that followed, I bled through my socks. My boots rubbed the back of my heel raw. Blisters peeled skin split open. I didn't report it. I didn't limp. I didn't give them any reason to look closer. Every day was a test I didn't know how to study for. You had to be sharp, fast, quiet, but not too quiet. You had to know when to vanish and when to stand at full height. I got screamed at for not calling out an officer I didn't see. I got screamed at again for calling out the wrong rank. I started carrying a small notepad with every insignia sketched out in the margins. I studied after lights out with a flashlight wedged into my armpit under my blanket, like a child reading forbidden books. One night, a cadet 2 bunks over whispered Nolan. "You always this stiff?" I didn't answer. Not because I was rude, but because I didn't know what to say. I hadn't been spoken to like that in weeks. He laughed once quietly. "You look like you've already been through hell." I turned and said, "Not hell, just Maryland." He didn't laugh again. There was a girl in my squad named Alvarez. She had a scar down her chin and a voice like gravel. She used to sing under her breath during long marches, barely above a hum. It annoyed the others, but I liked it. Made me feel like I wasn't the only one carrying ghosts. We became friends without saying we were. We didn't gossip or share secrets. We just learned how to nod at each other in the hallway when things got heavy. She passed me extra socks once. I shared my aspirin stash with her in return. That was enough. I wasn't the strongest in my company or the fastest. But I was steady. I could be counted on to carry weight, follow orders, shut up and move. And after a while, that was noticed. One of the upperclassmen, a cadet lieutenant, pulled me aside after a drill. Said I had grit. Said I reminded him of someone he used to serve with. I didn't ask who. I just nodded. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long time, staring at my reflection. My jaw looked sharper, my eyes darker. But I still saw her, the girl from the porch boots on her feet, smoke in her chest. Just quieter now. There was a rumor that if you made it through the first summer, you could make it through anything. They called it Beast Barracks for a reason. You're starved, sunburned, sleep-deprived, pushed until your voice is hoarse and your legs forget what rest feels like. I taped up my heels every morning and never said a word. My silence became its own armor. One morning, halfway through July, I stood at attention in the middle of the parade field, sweat running down my back. The flag was being raised. I looked up at it, and for the first time, I didn't think about my father. I thought about the locked room, and I realized I didn't want what was inside it anymore. I didn't want the medals he polished or the papers he framed. I wanted to earn my own, to make a name that didn't come from anyone else's mouth. Clara Nolan was a forged name, but the steel inside it, that was real. The morning we hiked Storm King Mountain, the fog was so thick It swallowed the path in every direction. You couldn't see your own shadow. Just boots in front, boots behind. That climb wasn't about endurance. It was about trust. One misstep, and you'd tumble. I remember my thighs shaking and my breath scraping against my ribs like I'd swallowed gravel. No one spoke. Just grunts, crunch of gravel, the hiss of breath through grit teeth. Halfway up, the blister on my right heel burst. I felt the warm spread of blood in my sock. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow. I locked my eyes on the boots ahead of me and matched their pace. Not out of pride, out of memory. Because at that point, pain had become familiar. I knew how to carry it. They always said West Point would break you. What they didn't say is that it would also teach you which parts you actually needed. What could be rebuilt and what could be buried. I started to lose track of the days. You don't mark time there the way civilians do. You mark progress by bruises fading, darkening, by how fast you can disassemble your rifle, by how long your shirt stays dry under pressure. The calendar stops mattering. My feet hardened, my fingers calloused, my back straightened slowly. I stopped jumping when officers barked. I stopped flinching at loud sounds. My body was still catching up to the pace, but my mind was changing. Discipline did something to me that years of silence at home never could. It didn't just demand strength. It revealed it. There's a moment that keeps replaying in my head even now. We were doing a forced march after a long training day, full packs 15 miles through rain and mud. My pack straps were cutting into my shoulders. My thighs were screaming. I was dead last in the line, but I hadn't fallen out. I remember thinking, this is still better than Sunday dinners. Not because it hurt less, but because the pain here had purpose. No one hit you for asking questions here. No one made you pretend to be something else. If you messed up, they told you. If you did well, they said so, though usually only once. But it mattered. There was a morning when Sergeant Branson stopped in front of me during a drill and said, "Win," then paused. I corrected him, "Nolan, sir." He blinked. "Right." "Nolan, you don't quit, do you?" It wasn't a compliment. It was a diagnosis. But it was the first time I felt seen. It took months, but eventually the other cadets stopped side-eyeing me. Alvarez started calling me Iron Feet. Someone else said I had a stare that could bend nails. I didn't laugh, but it stayed with me longer than I expected. The first time I got saluted back, I was walking across the quad, uniform crisp hair tucked under my cap just right. A younger cadet passed and gave me a sharp salute. I returned it without thinking. Then I stopped. Turned. Stood still in the middle of the quad for a second too long. Because that moment, that was mine. No performance, no pretense, no family legacy. Just me. Clara Nolan saluted in full daylight. After lights out that night, I pulled out my tin box, the one I'd buried the dress ashes in back home. Inside it now, my first commendation ribbon? Small, nothing flashy, but it felt like a root finally taking in good soil. I whispered into the darkness, "You were wrong about me." I didn't need to say who. The night knew. There were still bad days. Days when I wanted to vanish, when the ache of trying to belong in a place built by men for men pressed too hard against my bones. I had to work twice as hard to be noticed, 3 times to be respected. Some officers wouldn't even look at me in the eye. One cadet joked that I marched like a ballerina with a vendetta. I smiled, told him I'd danced on his pride and hadn't noticed. Alvarez laughed for a full 10 seconds. That was the day we became real friends. In my 3rd semester, I volunteered for extra field training. I said it was for experience. The truth was simpler. I didn't know where to put my anger unless I was sweating through it. Most of the time, I felt like a fire contained inside a glass box. Too hot to touch, but too contained to break anything. There was this one instructor, Lieutenant Marks. She was the only female officer in our leadership seminar. Her posture was sharp enough to draw blood. One day, she pulled me aside after class and said, "You don't need to prove anything anymore. You're already here." I nodded, said thank you. But inside, I thought, I'm not proving it to you. I was proving it to the house I left behind, to the locked door and the hollow stairs and the name that was never said with warmth. By the time we reached winter break, I didn't want to go home. And I didn't. I stayed on base, volunteered for logistics shifts, training detail, anything to keep moving. They sent a holiday card to my mother's house anyway, part of protocol. I never asked if she opened it. My hands were calloused now, but they were finally my own. There's a drawer I keep now, top right of my desk, locked always. Inside it are 24 letters I never mailed, all handwritten, all folded 3 times each one with the date marked in the corner, like a wound that still hasn't scabbed over. I started writing them at West Point. The first one was to my father. "You were wrong about me," it began. 3 pages. No curse words, no demands. Just facts sharpened. I never meant to send it. I just needed to write it with my own hand, as if getting the words out could loosen the knots in my spine. I folded it and tucked it into the pages of a notebook I never used again. After that came the letter to my mother. "I don't miss your silence," I wrote. "Only that really. 1 sentence." The rest of the page stayed blank. Somehow, it felt more honest that way, like a white flag soaked in cold tea. Then there was Thomas. That one was harder. "Do you ever think of me?" It started like that. No accusation, just a question. A quiet knock on a door I wasn't sure existed anymore. He hadn't written in years. Not even after I enlisted. Not after my name made it onto the Academy's published honor list. Not even after the accident in second-year training, when I fractured a rib and kept going like nothing happened. I thought he might have heard about that somehow. But maybe you stop hearing things when you've learned how to erase someone. Still, I kept his last Christmas card, the one he sent when I was 13. To Claire it said, misspelled like an oversight. Or maybe a warning. I kept it under my pillow until it yellowed. Sometimes I imagine mailing one of the letters, dropping it into a box on some half-silent street. But what would I expect in return? Silence again, or worse, politeness? That was always my mother's sharpest blade. We were trained in West Point to write field reports direct, efficient, emotionally void. No wasted ink. But my letters were different, full of things I never said out loud. Memory shards, flashbacks I couldn't unsee. Moments that haunted me with their ordinariness, like the smell of lavender detergent on my mother's sweaters. Or the way my father used to hum under his breath when he polished his medals. He'd only hum one song, always the same battle hymn of the Republic. I hated that I remembered that detail. It meant I still carried parts of them even when I thought I'd set them down. The letters helped, even when no one read them, especially then. Writing became ritual. Every week I carved out time to put something down on paper. Sometimes I didn't address it to anyone. Sometimes it was just to the girl who used to hide under the stairs, or to the sound of the locked door when it clicked shut. They weren't pretty. Some were messy, scrawled in rage. Others were shaky, like I'd written them with someone else's hand. One of them I tore up halfway through and taped back together. Not because I changed my mind, but because imperfection made it feel more alive. After graduation, I packed the letters in a sealed envelope and brought them with me to Afghanistan. They came with me in every deployment bag tucked next to my uniform in the inside mesh pocket. I never told anyone, not even Alvarez. Deployment was dust and heat and static. You learn quickly what survival sounds like. Sometimes it's a warning siren. Sometimes it's the silence that follows it. I saw men lose parts of themselves and not realize it until weeks later. I saw women patch themselves back together using nothing but duct tape and sarcasm. And through it all I wrote. Wrote to ghosts. Wrote to rooms I'd never enter again. Wrote to the versions of myself that died and came back in pieces. There was one night in Kandahar, I'd just returned from a convoy, adrenaline still humming in my knees. I sat under a busted-out light fixture and pulled out a page, wrote to my father again. Not to forgive him. That never felt true. But I wrote, I understand now. Fear makes cowards of men who wear medals. Then I folded it, carefully, 3 times. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd sent them. If Thomas had opened his and read about the night I snuck out the window, boots tied too tight, heart clawing its way up my throat. If my mother had read the one where I described the empty plate at the dinner table mine after I'd stopped coming home, would it have mattered? Probably not. But maybe. Back then, I still believed that words could open doors, even locked ones. I wrote another letter after we lost Corporal Denton to an IED. He was 19, still had braces on his bottom teeth. I wrote to his mother, but never mailed it. The Army would send the official statement. Mine wasn't official. It was just real. He died clutching a photo I wrote. He kept whispering her name even as his body failed him. I didn't know who her was. I just needed to give someone the truth. The envelope sits in my drawer, now addressed only as, to a mother who won't know. I've moved across the world twice since those days. Seen things I still can't say out loud, but I've kept the letters. Sometimes I open them not to read, but to feel the paper. The weight of what I never gave away. It's strange how silence becomes a language if you hold it long enough. My family spoke it fluently. I inherited the accent, but I rewrote the grammar. I don't write as often now, but I still keep a pen in every room, just in case, because some truths aren't meant to be shouted. They're meant to sit quietly in the dark, folded 3 times, waiting. The desert didn't look like I thought it would. I'd pictured dunes, rolling gold hills stretching into silence. But Afghanistan was sharper than that. Tan and broken, edges everywhere, rocks, steel glass ground into dust. Even the air had teeth. It didn't wrap around you. It scraped. We were stationed just outside Kandahar, 4th Deployment Unit Recon Support. I was 23, just promoted, still getting used to being saluted without flinching. The sun hit hard that year, blistering. But it was the silence between things that stuck with me most. It wasn't combat that haunted me. It was waiting for combat. You learn to live in the pauses, in the seconds between the pop of a radio and the explosion that might follow. In the glance someone gives you when they think the truck might be rigged. I learned to read the world in silences. That felt familiar. There was a little girl I used to see at the edge of the compound, maybe 7, maybe younger. Her face sharp with dust and heat. She'd show up near the wire fence in the morning, holding a plastic flag. American, bent at the tip. She never waved it, just stood there, watching. Her left cheek was burned, an old scar pale against her darker skin. But her eyes were what stayed with me. She never looked afraid, just steady, like glass that had already been through the fire. I don't know why I saw myself in her. Maybe because she never asked for anything. Maybe because she never looked away. I started bringing her small things, crackers, a pencil once. I'd set them on the concrete slab near the outer gatewalk back, without saying a word. She'd wait until I was 10 paces gone, then take them just as quietly. It wasn't a relationship. It was something quieter. A recognition. One day, I brought a candle stub, one of the little emergency ones they issue in the blackout kits. I don't know why. Maybe I thought she'd like the glow. Maybe I just wanted to pass on something I'd carried too long. She took it, held it in her hand like it was made of glass. The next morning, she didn't come. She didn't come the morning after that either. I still have that candle's twin in a tin in my locker. I never lit it. There were other moments, ones I don't talk about. A convoy ambush where I saw a friend Thomason shot through the leg. The way he screamed my name as I dragged him behind the tire well. The way his blood soaked my sleeves and dried stiff like rust. I remember sitting by his cot later that night while he slept, whispering, "You'll be fine," even though I wasn't sure. He lived, but something in me didn't come back from that day. I wrote a letter that night, to no one. Just a list. Things I've seen and won't forget. A girl with a burned face and a flag. She didn't wave blood on the inside of my collar. A soldier humming the same hymn my father used to. The way the sky looks right before mortar fire breaks it. I folded that list and tucked it into my vest. Carried it for weeks, until the paper wore soft and thin. I thought often about the locked room at home. Strange right thousands of miles from Maryland, and I could still picture the doorknob. The sound it made when I tried it. That metallic click. The shadow line on the hardwood from where sunlight never reached. I wondered if the room was still there, if it had changed after my father died. Or maybe I just needed it to stay the same so I could know what I'd left behind. I didn't miss them. That's not what it was. It was more like tracing a scar. You don't miss the pain. You just need to remember where it came from. One night, Alvarez found me sitting on the roof of the watchtower, staring out past the hills. She sat beside me, handed me a protein bar. "You look like you're waiting for something." I said, "Maybe I am." She said nothing else. That was the thing about her. She didn't need the story. She just stayed. That night, I dreamed of the girl again, but this time she was inside the locked room, standing in front of my father's medals, holding the candle. And the room was full of light, not fire, not destruction, just light. I woke up with my hands clenched into fists and the taste of dust in my mouth. The next day, I volunteered for a humanitarian escort supplies to a school compound west of Lashkar Gah. It wasn't required, but I needed to move, needed to do something. The ride there was quiet. No chatter, just the hum of engines and the crackle of the radio. When we arrived, I handed out notebooks. Chalk, water filters. A little girl tugged at my sleeve. She had the same scar, or maybe a different one. I couldn't tell. But her eyes, they were the same. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. I watched her walk away, head high, spine straight. That night, I lit the emergency candle. I let it burn all the way down. Not for her. Not for them. For me. The message came through encrypted channels at 03:27. I was off shift boots, half unlaced forehead pressed against the window glass in my bunk. Alvarez was snoring soft beside me. I wasn't supposed to check the tablet that late, but something made me glance. Subject: notification of death. Cole Edward L. Win date: November 12th. Cause cardiac arrest. Non-combat related. I stared at the screen for a long time. There was no condolence, no personal note, just the military equivalent of a punctuation mark. I read it once, twice. then turned the screen off and placed it under my bunk. I sat up for hours after that. No tears, just silence. Heavy, deliberate, the kind that feels earned. He was gone, the man who said I'd never stand for anything, who said I'd disgrace the Wynn name, who told me at 16 that if I walked out that door, I'd never be welcome back. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel grief either. It was something colder, like being unhooked from something you didn't know you were still tied to. The funeral happened 3 days later. I didn't go, wasn't invited. Didn't even get an email from Thomas. I found out through a live stream link buried in the base announcements. That's how they do things now. You click, you watch, you disappear again. He was buried at Arlington. Full honors. Gun salute, folded flag. The whole ceremony so clean it made my skin itch. Thomas gave the eulogy. My brother's starched suit eyes damp but steady voice clear. Our father was a man of great discipline and devotion, a protector, a patriot, a pillar of strength. I watched from a shared laptop in the corner of the barracks rec room, earbuds in. No one else knew what I was watching. I kept waiting for my name. Nothing. Not a mention. Not a pause. Not even a mispronunciation. It was like I had never existed. I shut the laptop halfway through the hymn. Same one Dad used to hum. Mine eyes have seen the glory. It felt like someone had placed a hand over my mouth from 3,000 miles away. That night, I walked the outer perimeter until sunrise. Didn't sign out. Didn't ask permission. No one stopped me. The desert wind followed close behind. My boots kicked up dust. I lit the last stub of that old candle and let it flicker out in my hand. I wasn't mourning him. I was mourning the version of me that still wanted something from him. 2 weeks later, a care package came in from my mother. First time in 5 years, a small square box. No return address, just my name, Clara Wynn, as if saying it again would glue something back together. Inside was one item, an old photograph. Me at 10 years old in the backyard holding a wooden sword I'd made with Thomas. I'm smiling, gap-toothed. My eyes are squinted from the sun. In the background, my father stands near the porch, looking the other way. Uninterested. No note. Just the image. I almost tore it in half, but something made me stop. I folded it and placed it beneath my bunk. Not to keep it, just to make it small. Grief is strange when the person was already gone long before they died. I started thinking about the door again. That room, the medals, the records, the silence around it. Did they box it all up? Did my mother pack it away carefully, or did she lock the door and walk past it like she used to? Was there dust now? Were the medals still polished? I imagined myself standing at the threshold again, 17, barefoot, lip bleeding. Only this time, there was no one inside. Just echoes. Just me. A few nights after the funeral, I wrote a letter. Not to my father, not to Thomas, to the house. Thank you for teaching me how to live without applause. That was the first line. I never mailed it, but I sealed it and tucked it into the lining of my jacket. Still there, stitched inside the inner pocket just behind the medal I earned on that last recon mission. They gave it to me quietly in the field, a clasped handshake, a nod. I didn't tell anyone back home. There was no one to tell. I went to chapel that week, sat in the back. Not to pray, just to sit. One of the chaplains saw my uniform and gave me a smile. He said, "You look like you carry a lot." I said, "Doesn't everyone?" He didn't push, just nodded and said, "God grieves too, you know, for things we never say." I didn't believe in God, not then, but I liked that idea, that maybe someone mourned what never got spoken. When I returned to duty the next day, I was sharper, quieter, focused. No one mentioned the funeral, No one asked about home. It was as if I'd been born in that desert, carried there by wind and stubbornness alone. But something had shifted. Not like a wound healing, more like scar tissue hardening. I kept walking, kept saluting, kept showing up. That was my ritual. That was my grief. I hadn't seen the house in 9 years. Not since I left with a duffel bag, a shaved head, and the sound of my father's silence trailing behind me like smoke. When the flight landed in Maryland, I rented a car and drove the back roads home, not because I didn't remember the way, but because I wanted to feel the distance. Each mile was a version of me I'd shed, every uniform, every rank, every scar. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want to give them time to prepare. The house looked the same. That hollow kind of perfect. White siding, green shutters, porch swing that still leaned to the left. The flower beds were freshly pruned, as if the world hadn't changed around them. I pulled up and sat in the car for a full minute, the engine running, hands on the wheel. Then I stepped out in full dress uniform. I hadn't worn it since the last ceremony. Pressed black jacket medals, a lined collar stiff with authority. I didn't wear it for them. I wore it for the girl who never got to sit at the head of the table. For the one who burned her dress behind the shed. For the one who stared at locked doors and dared to believe they weren't built for her. The air smelled like mulch and lemon cleaner. That smell hadn't changed. Not even time could erase it. I walked up the porch steps, slow. The wood creaked in the same places. My boots didn't hesitate. My mother answered the door. She looked older, but not fragile. Her hair was pulled back the same way it always had been, parted down the middle, precise. Her eyes didn't widen when she saw me. They didn't narrow either. They just settled on my face like she was taking inventory, like she was checking for something she expected not to find. "Clara," she said. Not a question, not a greeting. Just a fact spoken into the space between us. I didn't speak. She stepped aside, but not all the way. I stood on the threshold, upright still. I don't know what I wanted in that moment. Forgiveness? No. Recognition, maybe. Or just proof that I existed in their world again. That I wasn't just a ghost in a different uniform. "I'm not here long," I said. I assumed she said. Her voice hadn't changed. Still clipped. Still controlled. We didn't hug. We didn't fight. We just stood there, looking at each other like two soldiers from opposing sides, meeting under a temporary flag of truce. "I wanted to see the house," I said. She nodded. "You're seeing it?" I asked, "Is Thomas here?" She shook her head. "He's in Atlanta. He has children now?" Of course he did. I imagined the kind of father he was. Present, mild, disappearing into whatever mold he'd learned from our father. We stood in the entryway for another long minute. The air was thick with memory. I could smell the roast she'd probably prepared out of habit. There were flowers on the side table. The same kind she used to cut in the early evenings, always too soon, always too neat. I took a step forward. She didn't stop me. The hardwood was still polished to a military shine. Every photo still on the walls, but none of me. Just Thomas. Just my father. And the family dog we'd buried in the backyard when I was 13. I walked past the staircase, past the dining room, toward the hallway that led to the room. The door was still there, but the lock was gone. I turned the knob and stepped inside. It was empty. No medals, no display cases, no photos. Just a single nail where his service flag had once hung, and a thin line of dust where the shelf had stood. The room smelled like old wood and nothing else. Like it had been forgotten, not cleared. I stood there for a long time. Let the silence fill me, not break me. Then I reached into my pocket, and pulled out the deployment badge from my first tour. Not the fancy medal, just the metal strip they gave us with our blood types etched in. The one that saw me through heat and sand and static. I placed it on the empty shelf. Face down. My mother hadn't followed me in. She stood at the hallway's edge like she'd forgotten the shape of that door, too. She said, "He wouldn't have liked that." I looked at her. "He's not here," I said. That was all. She didn't respond. I walked back through the house without touching anything. Past the table that never welcomed my elbows. Past the mirror that once reflected the wrong girl. Past the kitchen where I was told I wasn't theirs. When I reached the door, she asked, "Will you be back?" I paused, then said, "That depends on what you mean by back." I didn't wait for her answer. The porch felt lighter this time, like something had unhooked from my ribs. I drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. Not because I was strong, because I didn't need to anymore. Politics was never the plan. I didn't grow up dreaming of microphones or marble floors. But the path from uniform to office wasn't a leap, it was a continuation. A different kind of war, just with fewer bruises on the outside. It started with a speech. I was 29. They asked me to speak at a veterans rally in D.C. small venue, big energy. Folding chairs, coffee in styrofoam cups, people nodding before you even finished your sentence. I talked about what it means to return home and find nothing waiting for you. About what it's like to bury fellow soldiers while the news cycle talks over them. About silence and how it follows us in the spaces where policy never reaches. Someone filmed it. I didn't know. I wouldn't have changed anything if I had. 2 days later, the video went viral. My inbox was full. Reporters, consultants, a few familiar names from the academy. One message from a man who used to ignore me at every meeting. "You speak like someone who's seen the inside of the house and the fire outside it." We need that. They weren't wrong. But I hesitated. I didn't trust that kind of light. I'd lived too long in shadow to believe it wouldn't burn. It wasn't until Alvarez called that I took it seriously. She'd left the service by then, working with a nonprofit in Texas. She said, "Run, not for them. For the ones who don't get to sit at the table." Then she hung up. That was enough. I filed paperwork quietly. I didn't call my mother. I didn't tell Thomas. I wasn't looking for family support. I was building something without their architecture. The party was skeptical at first. Too young, too blunt, too formal. One consultant told me I needed to smile more in photos. Another asked if I'd consider softening my stance on military accountability. I stared at him and said, "Would you ask a man that he didn't answer?" I refused to use the Win name on any of the materials. Every poster, every commercial, every ballot line, Clara Nolan. It wasn't for secrecy. It was a choice, a declaration. We ran lean. I didn't do flashy appearances. No slick suits or stadium rallies. I held town halls in school gyms. Sat with single mothers and retired factory workers. Listened more than I spoke. That felt right. The first thing you learn in combat is that silence tells the truth faster than words. When they asked about my family, I gave them a quiet smile and said, "My family taught me everything I needed to unlearn." They'd laugh, but not all the way. Some of them got it. The first debate was brutal. My opponent, incumbent, polished the kind of man who says, "God bless the troops," then votes against their health care, tried to corner me on experience. Called me green. Said you've barely left your boots behind. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "That's the problem with this place. Too many people left the field and forgot who they were fighting for." The room went quiet. Then the applause started. I didn't smile. I never smiled in those moments. It wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning. A reporter asked me once, "What drives you?" I could have said a million things. Duty, justice, reform. But I said every locked door I wasn't allowed to open. She didn't print that line. Election night came with rain, thunder in the distance air, thick with tension. My team gathered in a borrowed office space downtown. Folded chairs, cold pizza eyes on the screen. I didn't pace. I sat in the corner, hands folded, just listening. When the final count came in, I didn't cheer. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out over the city. I was 32, and a senator. The youngest in our state's history. One of only 6 women in the chamber. The first veteran from my district in 2 decades. I thought of my father then. Not with triumph, not with spite, just as a fixed point in the long arc of a story I no longer needed to escape. I wore the same dress uniform to the swearing-in that I had worn to my return home. Still pressed, still heavy on the shoulders, still mine. I didn't invite my family to the ceremony. My mother sent a card, white blank inside, with a check mark beside my name. Thomas emailed congratulations from his work address. I read it, closed the tab, and didn't reply. The oath I took that day felt different. Not just words, not just tradition, but an unspoken promise to the girl who had stood outside a locked room and whispered her name into the dark. I carried her with me into that chamber. I still do. Every time I speak, I hear her breathing, waiting, listening. She's the reason I say things plainly, the reason I stand without apology. And I will never again ask for a seat at someone else's table. I bring my own chair now. Being a senator isn't like the movies. It's colder, quieter. There are no dramatic speeches echoing through marbled halls. Mostly, it's paperwork, meetings, the constant hum of compromise, the low click of shoes in hallways that smell like polished wood and filtered air. I don't mind the quiet. I've always known how to survive in rooms where no one looks directly at you. I took office on a gray Tuesday, swore the oath with a steady hand and an unreadable face. Cameras clicked. People clapped politely. The marble was colder than I expected. After the ceremony, someone asked me how it felt. Like being handed a scalpel, I said. Sharp, precise, dangerous if misused. The media labeled me fast, hard-edged, no nonsense, emotionally distant. One headline read, "The senator with scars she doesn't mention." Another said, "Too stoic to charm." But it might be working. I didn't correct them. They weren't wrong. I started keeping a photo of my first unit on my desk. It's not staged. We're covered in dust, grinning through exhaustion. Alvarez has her arm around my shoulder, mid-laugh. I'm not smiling, just looking at the camera like I always do, direct, steady, real. Beside the photo sits a letter. The first one I ever wrote to myself, folded carefully, yellowing around the edges. You are not what they said. I read it sometimes after long nights, after a committee hearing that goes nowhere. After I listen to a room full of men talk about defense budgets like they're just numbers, like they don't carry the weight of breath and bone. No one knows what to do with me here. I'm not a schmoozer. I don't soften my voice. I don't pretend I believe in someone's character because they once sent flowers to a funeral. That makes people nervous. I don't raise my voice. I just ask the kind of questions that make people sweat. At a subcommittee on veterans care, I asked a general why we still let young soldiers come home to eviction notices and overdraft fees. He blinked, shuffled his notes, said, "We're working on solutions." "Work faster," I said. "They don't get to delay trauma." The room went still. My staff tells me I need to smile more. Make space for warmth. They say senator people want to see themselves in you. I tell them, the ones who matter already do. Sometimes young women visit the gallery and watch us vote. I spot them through the glass-wide eyes notebooks, clutched tight hair in braids or buns or messy knots. One of them had a scar on her chin. She couldn't have been more than 17. I stared at her just long enough to make sure she saw me. Then I nodded. Quiet victories. The best kind. When the Senate isn't in session, I walk the halls alone. I like hearing my own steps echo. I like feeling the marble under my shoes and remembering what it took to get here. Every insult, every door slammed, every silence that stretched until it bruised. I don't carry grudges, but I don't forget. My mother never sent flowers. She mailed me an article clipping once highlighted with my name underlined. No note. Thomas sent a photo of his daughter. She's 3 curly-haired, serious-eyed. She asks about her aunt sometimes, he wrote. I didn't reply. Some things stay locked for a reason, but I keep the photo. It's pinned to my fridge with a magnet from Fort Benning. Not for family. For the memory of what was never said. Late one evening, I met with a fellow senator, older, sharp-tongued, respected. He called me the steel spine in a velvet suit. I didn't wear velvet, but I let it go. He asked what I was running from. I told him nothing, then added, I ran through it. I'm just not slowing down. That shut him up. Some nights, I dream of the candle again. The one I left on the windowsill back home. In the dream, it's always lit. No wind, no flicker, just steady flame. A witness. I don't light candles now, but I keep a box of them in my drawer. Still sealed, still waiting, because one day I might pass one on. Not as a symbol, but as proof. That silence can be survived. That locked rooms can be opened. That scars are not shameful, just stories waiting for the right listener. They call me electable now. Scarred and electable. And they're right. But what they don't understand is I was electable long before they saw me. They just didn't know how to recognize the sound of someone still standing after the fire. It arrived in a plain envelope, cream-colored, no-return address. The handwriting stopped me before I even opened it, sharp-slanted, too careful. Thomas. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time just looking at it. I'd just come back from the Capitol, my shoes still on shoulders stiff from the weight of the day. The apartment was quiet. My breath felt loud. I opened the envelope slowly, afraid it might undo something I'd spent years building. Inside a single-page letter, a photo, and something heavier wrapped in paper. The letter was dated 3 months ago. Clara, I don't know how to begin this. I've started and stopped a dozen times. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to say it what I never said. I'm sorry. For disappearing. For letting them cut you out. For following the rules when I should have spoken. I was afraid. Dad made us all afraid. I thought, if I stayed quiet, things would stay intact. But silence doesn't hold anything together. It just lets things rot slowly. I watched them erase you, and I let them. And I'm sorry. I've kept something for you. He never wore it. I thought maybe you'd want it. Or not. I don't know. I just couldn't throw it away. Your niece asks about you sometimes. She saw your picture in a magazine, said you looked like a general. She's not wrong. I hope this reaches you whole. T, I didn't cry. I didn't fold the letter. I didn't touch the photo right away either. When I finally looked at it, I knew the image before I even saw the full thing. A snapshot from childhood. Thomas and me in the backyard. I was in my plastic soldier helmet, grinning, holding a garden stick like a rifle. He was beside me, arms crossed, trying to look serious. In the background, our father's shadow framed the porch. The photo was worn at the edges. Someone had kept it in a wallet too long. It smelled faintly of paper and soap. I unwrapped the last item slowly. A medal, still in its original case, untouched. The gold was dulled from time, but unmarred. It was one of the highest distinctions for service presented to my father post-retirement. He never wore it, always said it's not for show, but he displayed the others, polished them, framed them, This one stayed boxed, buried. Now it was in my hands. I held it there for a long time, not thinking, just feeling its weight. It was heavier than I expected, but not in the way that mattered. I set it down on the table and looked at it in the light. It meant nothing to me. Not because it hadn't been earned, but because it was never meant to be passed to someone like me. Not until now. I lit a candle, not out of ritual, just to see the flame next to it. The light reflected off the metal surface in broken ways. I picked up the metal and walked it across the room. Opened the drawer where I kept my own. My ribbons, my deployments, my commendations. I slid his into the back. Not to display, just to file it. Let the record show I didn't throw it away, but I didn't let it shine brighter than mine. I stood in the hallway with the letter in my hand, rereading it once more. There were lines between the sentences, gaps where years lived. We had become separate languages raised in the same house. I didn't know if we'd ever speak fluently again, but he had written it. That mattered, more than I expected it to. Later, I sat on the floor beside my window. The city below looked like stars trapped under glass. I didn't feel triumph or peace, just a quiet settling, like dust in a room no one's entered in a while. I lit another candle and placed it by the window like I used to. A single flame. Steady. I didn't do it for him, or for Thomas, or even for the father who never believed I'd build anything but shame. I did it for the girl who stood in the hallway of a house that never said her name like it meant something. I did it because sometimes we bury people while they're still alive, and sometimes years later, they claw their way back to leave you something true. Even if it's too late, especially then. I bought the house just outside of Charlottesville. Nothing grand, 2 stories quiet lot red door, the kind of red that doesn't scream, just holds your gaze. The realtor said it needed a little work. I said, good. I wanted something with edges, things I could fix. The first time I turned the key, it stuck. I leaned my weight into it, heard the click, and stepped inside. Light filtered through the dust like old film. No ghosts, just silence, the clean kind. Every room is unlocked. I left them that way on purpose. It's been 4 years since I was sworn in. I still serve, still vote, still speak, but I don't chase spotlight. I prefer offices with closed doors and open files, the kind of work that changes things quietly. Most days, I wake up before dawn. I run until the sun breaks over the hills. My neighbors don't know who I am, just that I mow my own lawn and wave politely. That's enough. In the front hall, I've hung 2 photos. One of my first unit, still smudged with Kandahar dust. The other, smaller black and white, my grandmother in uniform hands, tucked behind her back chin, high eyes steady. The one person who saw me before I ever saw myself. And on the shelf beside them, the first letter I ever wrote. You are not what they said. It sits in a simple frame. I don't read it anymore. I don't need to. I just keep it there visible. Proof. People still ask how I did it. The arc from estranged daughter to senator. They want a roadmap, a TED Talk, a clean origin story. I don't give them one. Because it wasn't clean. It was fire, blisters, nightmares, silence so loud it cracked the ribs. But I kept going. Not out of strength. Out of need. Some nights I walk barefoot across the hardwood floors and let the sound follow me through the house. I light a single candle by the back window. Same brand, same scent. Lemon and cedar. The wax pools slowly and the flame flickers like it remembers everything. I don't light it for them anymore. Not for my mother's silence. Not for my father's locked room. not even for Thomas, who found his way back too late. I light it for her, the girl who whispered her name into a hallway that swallowed it whole, who stood outside the room she wasn't allowed to enter and refused to disappear. I open every door now, not because I'm fearless, but because I know exactly what it costs to be locked out. When I sit on the porch with my coffee, I watch the wind shift across the grass. There's a scar on the inside of my forearm, small, barely noticeable, unless you know where to look. I got it crawling under barbed wire in a training field outside Fort Sill. I used to hate it. Now I trace it sometimes, just to remember the shape of survival. I don't keep medals out in the open. They're boxed, stored, not hidden, just not worshipped. What I keep visible are the things that carry breath letters, books' fingerprints in the paint from where I brushed it wrong and didn't fix it. These are the real things. The human ones. I get letters sometimes, from girls, young women, sometimes men too. They write about doors, about silence, about what it means to be erased and keep going anyway. I write back. Not all of them, but the ones who ask the right questions. I don't give them advice. I give them stories, real ones. The kind that bleed a little, the kind that don't ask for permission. Once someone asked if I'd ever run for president. I laughed. Said no. But what I meant was I've already won the only race that mattered. The one against the version of me they tried to bury. Now I live in a house with a red door, every room unlocked. And in the quiet of early morning, before the phones ring and the inbox floods, I stand by the window candle flickering behind me and whisper my name. Clara Wynne. And this time, the house says it back.